The space station called Velros Prime floated in the darkness between three distant suns. It was a massive place, built by many species working together over hundreds of years. At its center was the Great Arena, a huge open space where the galactic endurance trials took place every solar cycle. Species from across the known galaxy sent their young warriors here to compete, to prove that their kind was strong and worthy of respect. Una stood on the observation deck, looking down at the arena below. She was a human woman of 32 years, with black hair tied back in a simple ponytail and tired eyes that had seen too much paperwork. She worked as a xenobiologist on the station, studying alien species and their bodies. It was quiet work, usually. But today, everyone on the station had stopped to watch the trials. Beside her stood Taiho, a human engineer who had been her friend for nearly 10 years. He was tall and thin, with messy hair and oil stains on his uniform that he never seemed to notice. He held a cup of cold coffee in his hands and watched the arena with a worried look on his face. "I still don't understand why we're here," Taiho said. "We're not competing. Humans never compete in these things." Una shrugged. "I wanted to see the Karathi. I've read about them, but I've never seen them in person." The Karathi were famous across the galaxy. They were a species that looked like massive wolves walking on two legs. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick fur that ranged from silver to deep black. Their eyes glowed like gold coins in firelight. They had ruled these trials for 300 years, winning almost every competition. Other species feared them, respected them, and stayed far away from them. As Una watched, the Karathi delegation entered the arena. The crowd fell silent. Even the other alien species stopped their conversations and turned to look. At the front of the group walked the Alpha. His name was Raken, and he was the leader of the Grey Maw Pack, the most powerful pack on the Karathi homeworld. He was enormous, even by Karathi standards. His fur was silver like moonlight, and his golden eyes swept across the arena as if he owned it. In many ways, he did. Behind him walked the other Karathi adults, all of them warriors with scars on their bodies and pride in their steps. And behind them came the cubs, the young Karathi who would compete in today's trial. Una counted them. There were 6 cubs, all of them strong and healthy, their young muscles already showing the power of their species. But one cub caught her attention. It was a female, smaller than all the others. Her fur was pale gray, almost white, and her golden eyes were wide with something that looked like fear. While the other cubs walked with confidence, this one moved carefully, as if every step hurt her. Una could see her legs trembling, even from this distance. "Taiho," Una said quietly. "Look at that small one." Taiho leaned forward, squinting. "The little gray cub? What about her?" "She's shaking. And look at how she's breathing. Short, fast breaths. She's exhausted already, and the race hasn't even started." Taiho frowned. "Maybe she's just nervous?" Una shook her head. "No, that's physical exhaustion. I've seen it in 100 different species. That cub shouldn't be competing today." Down in the arena, the small cub took her place at the starting line. The other Karathi cubs stood tall and proud, but she seemed to shrink into herself, trying to become invisible. Alpha Raken stood at the edge of the track, watching. His face showed no emotion at all. The race was called the Path of Proving. It was a 40-kilometer sprint across harsh terrain, under gravity that was 3 times stronger than Earth's. The track wound through artificial mountains, crossed rivers of cold water, and climbed steep hills covered in sharp rocks. It was designed to break the weak and reward the strong. Una had read the rules carefully. Competitors could not help each other. If someone fell, they had to get up on their own or be eliminated. If someone was injured, the medical teams would only help after the race was over. It was brutal, but the Karathi believed that suffering built character. Other species lined up alongside the Karathi cubs. There were Velthari, tall insect-like creatures with 6 legs built for speed. There were Dramoni, heavy reptilian beings with thick scales and endless stamina. There were even a few Sylphani, graceful bird-like aliens who could run almost as fast as they could fly. But there were no humans. Humans had only joined galactic society 50 years ago. To most alien species, they were curiosities at best and weaklings at worst. Humans had no claws, no fangs, no armor plating, no natural weapons of any kind. They were soft and fragile and died easily. No one expected anything from them, and so no one invited them to compete. Yuna didn't mind. She had no desire to run 40 kilometers under crushing gravity. But watching that small Karathi cub standing at the starting line, she felt something heavy settle in her chest. It was worry. It was fear. And underneath both of those things, it was anger. "She's gonna get hurt," Yuna said. "Maybe," Taiho agreed. "But there's nothing we can do. It's their culture. We're not supposed to interfere." The starting signal sounded, a deep horn that echoed through the entire arena. The competitors exploded forward, legs pumping, bodies straining against the heavy gravity. The crowd cheered. The small cub, whose name Yuna did not yet know, started running with the others. For the first few hundred meters, she kept up. But then, slowly, she began to fall behind. One competitor passed her, then another, then another. Her legs, which had been trembling before, now seemed barely able to hold her weight. Yuna gripped the railing of the observation deck so hard her knuckles turned white. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, little one. You can do this." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. The cub was failing. Everyone could see it. And in the Karathi delegation's viewing box, Alpha Raken watched his daughter struggle with a face made of stone. He did not move to help her. He would not move to help her. Because in the world of the Karathi, weakness was death. And mercy was the greatest weakness of all. Yuna didn't know it yet, but in the next hour, she would challenge everything the Karathi believed. She would stand before their alpha and refuse to back down. She would lift a fallen cub in her arms and dare the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy to stop her. And nothing, not for the Karathi, not for the humans, not for the entire galaxy, would ever be the same again. The race continued under the harsh lights of the arena. Giant screens floated above the track, showing every moment to the thousands of spectators who had come to watch. The cameras followed the leaders, the fastest, Karathi cubs and the Velthari runners who moved like shadows across the ground. But Yuna was not watching the leaders. Her eyes stayed fixed on the small gray cub at the back of the pack. The cub's name was Lyra, though Yuna would not learn this until later. She was the youngest daughter of Alpha Raken, born smaller and weaker than her siblings. In Karathi culture, this was a source of deep shame. Weak cubs were expected to prove themselves or be cast out of the pack. There was no middle ground. There was no mercy. Lyra had trained for this race her entire young life. She had woken before sunrise every day to run. She had eaten bitter herbs that were supposed to make her stronger. She had endured her father's cold silence and her siblings' cruel jokes. She had done everything right. But sometimes, doing everything right is not enough. At kilometer 15, Lyra was already last. The heavy gravity pressed down on her small body, like invisible hands trying to push her into the ground. Her lungs burned with every breath. Her legs felt like they were made of wet sand. But she kept running, because stopping was not allowed. Stopping meant failure. Stopping meant she was worthless. The crowd had begun to notice her. Some of them laughed. Others shook their heads in disappointment. A few of the alien spectators made comments about weak Karathi blood, which made the Karathi delegation growl with anger, but do nothing else. In the viewing box, Alpha Raken stood perfectly still. His golden eyes followed his daughter's struggling form on the screens. His claws were extended, digging into the metal railing in front of him. But he did not speak. He did not move. He simply watched. Why doesn't he help her? Taiho asked quietly. She's his daughter. Yuna's jaw tightened, because helping her would shame her even more. In their culture, if a parent helps a child during a trial, it proves the child is unworthy. It's better to let her fail on her own than to admit she needs help. That's insane. That's their way. On the track, Lyra reached kilometer 25. She was moving so slowly now that she was barely faster than walking. The other competitors had long since disappeared ahead of her. She was alone on a stretch of rocky terrain, surrounded by sharp stones and cold wind. The cameras still showed her, because her struggle had become entertainment for the crowd. Yuna felt sick. At kilometer 30, Lyra stumbled. She caught herself, but the movement cost her precious energy. Her breathing was ragged now, each inhale a desperate gasp for air. Sweat matted her pale gray fur. Her golden eyes, so much like her father's, were glazed with exhaustion. She's not going to make it, Yuna said. Her voice was flat, certain. She had studied enough alien biology to know what she was seeing. The cub's body was shutting down. Her heart was working too hard. Her muscles were failing. If she kept pushing, she could cause permanent damage or worse. Taiho put a hand on her shoulder. Yuna, there's nothing we can do. We're not allowed on the track. We're not competitors. We're just observers. I know, Yuna said. But her hands were shaking. At kilometer 32, Lyra collapsed. It happened suddenly, without warning. One moment she was running, or trying to run, and the next moment her legs simply gave out beneath her. She fell forward onto the rocky ground, her small body hitting the stones with a sound that made Yuna flinch. She did not get up. The crowd went silent for a moment, then began to murmur. On the giant screens, Lyra's still form was displayed for everyone to see. Her chest was heaving with desperate breaths. Her eyes were open but unfocused. She tried to push herself up with her arms, but they trembled and failed. She was done. According to the rules, she would lie there until the race was over. Then the medical teams would come to collect her. It might take another hour. In that time, under the crushing gravity and the cold wind, her condition would only get worse. Yuna had seen this before in other species. Sometimes they recovered. Sometimes they died. T. In the Korathi viewing box, Alpha Rickon finally moved. He turned away from the screens, his face completely blank. He would not watch his daughter's shame. He would pretend she did not exist until she either recovered or died. That was the Korathi way. Something inside Yuna snapped. She didn't make a conscious decision. Her body simply moved on its own. One moment she was standing on the observation deck, and the next moment she was running toward the arena entrance. She heard Taiho calling after her, but his voice seemed far away, unimportant. The guards at the entrance tried to stop her. They were Dramoni, big reptilian creatures with scales like armor. But Yuna ducked under their arms and kept running. They shouted at her that they did not chase her. Why would they? She was just a human. What could she possibly do? The track was hard under her feet. The gravity was brutal, 3 times what she was used to. Every step felt like walking through deep water while carrying a heavy weight. Her muscles screamed at her to stop. Her lungs burned. But she kept going. She found Lyra at kilometer 32, exactly where she had fallen. The cub looked even smaller up close. Her pale gray fur was dirty and matted. Her golden eyes looked up at Yuna with confusion and fear. She tried to growl, to show that she was still strong, but the sound that came out was weak and broken. Yuna knelt beside her. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm here to help you." Lyra's eyes widened. Help? No one was supposed to help. It was against the rules. It was against everything she had ever been taught. But she was so tired. So very tired. Una slid her arms under the cub's body and lifted her. Lyra was heavier than she expected. Karathi cubs were dense with muscle even when young. But Una had carried heavier patience in her work. She stood up slowly, adjusting her balance against the crushing gravity, and began to walk back toward the arena entrance. Behind her, the crowd exploded with noise. Some were cheering. Some were booing. Some were simply confused. No one had ever done anything like this before. A human, a soft, weak, fragile human, had just picked up a Karathi cub in the middle of the Galactic Endurance trials, and somewhere in the Karathi viewing box, Alpha Raken turned around and saw what was happening. His golden eyes found the small human woman carrying his daughter, and something ancient and dangerous woke up inside him. He began to move toward the track, and Una, still carrying Lyra in her arms, had no idea that she had just done something that could get her killed. The arena had never been so quiet. Thousands of spectators from dozens of different species sat in their seats and watched with wide eyes. The race was still happening somewhere in the distance. The other competitors were still running toward the finish line, but no one cared about that anymore. All eyes were on the small human woman standing in the middle of the track with a Karathi cub in her arms. Una's muscles burned from the effort of carrying Lyra under the heavy gravity. Her arms shook. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. But she kept walking, one slow step at a time, toward the edge of the track where the medical stations waited. She did not see Alpha Raken coming. The crowd saw him first. A wave of gasps and whispers spread through the arena as the massive silver Karathi descended from the viewing box and walked onto the track. He moved with the slow, deliberate steps of a predator who knows his prey cannot escape. His golden eyes were fixed on Una. His claws, each one as long as a human finger, extended from his hands with soft clicking sounds. Taiho tried to run onto the track to warn her, but the Dramoni guards grabbed him and held him back. He could only watch helplessly as the Alpha approached his friend. Una heard the heavy footsteps behind her and stopped walking. She turned around slowly, careful not to drop Lyra, and found herself looking up at the most terrifying creature she had ever seen. Raken was enormous. Standing this close to him, Una realized that her head barely reached his chest. His silver fur seemed to glow in the arena lights. His golden eyes burned with an emotion she could not name: anger, perhaps, or something older and more dangerous. When he spoke, his voice was so deep that she felt it vibrating in her bones. "You dare touch my bloodkin?" The words were quiet, but they carried across the silent arena. Everyone heard them. Everyone held their breath. Una swallowed hard. Her heart was pounding so fast she could hear it in her ears. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run, to drop the cub and flee before this monster tore her apart. But she did not run. She did not drop Lyra. She stood her ground and looked up at the Alpha's face. "She collapsed," Una said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "She needs medical attention." Raken's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that could bite through steel. "She is Karathi. She will endure or she will fall. That is our way. Put her down and face judgment for your crime." "What crime?" "Saving a child's life? You have violated sacred law." Raken took another step closer. Now he was so close that Una could feel the heat radiating from his massive body. No one may touch a Karathi cub during the trials. No one may interfere with the path of proving. These laws have existed for 1,000 years. You have broken them. Then your laws are wrong. The words left Una's mouth before she could stop them. She heard Taiho make a strangled sound of horror somewhere behind her. She saw the Karathi delegation rise to their feet in fury. She watched Raken's golden eyes widen with shock and rage. No one spoke to an alpha this way. No one in the history of the Karathi had ever stood before an alpha and called their laws wrong. The punishment for such disrespect was death, immediate, brutal, and without mercy. Raken's claws twitched. His massive body tensed. Every Karathi in the arena could see that he was moments away from killing this small, foolish human who had dared to challenge him. But Yuna did not back down. "Look at her," Yuna said, her voice rising. "Look at your daughter. She's exhausted. She's dehydrated. Her heart rate is dangerously high. If she doesn't get medical help soon, she could suffer permanent damage. She could die." Yuna's eyes met Raken's without flinching. "Is your pride worth more than her life?" For a long moment, no one moved. The entire arena seemed frozen in time. Raken stared down at the human woman before him, and she stared back up at him. Neither of them looked away. In Yuna's arms, Lyra stirred weakly. Her golden eyes, clouded with exhaustion, looked up at her father's face. She tried to speak, but only a soft whimper came out. The sound was small and broken and full of pain. Something flickered in Raken's eyes. "You are either very brave or very stupid," he said slowly. "Perhaps both." "I'm a doctor," Yuna replied. "I took an oath to help anyone who needs it. That oath doesn't care about your laws or your pride or your 1,000 years of tradition. It only cares about saving lives. And if I kill you right now, what good will your oath do then?" Yuna's jaw tightened. "Then you'll have proven that you care more about your pride than your daughter's life. Everyone here will see it. Everyone will know. Is that the legacy you want? Is that what you want Lyra to remember about her father? That he killed the person who tried to save her?" The arena was so silent that Yuna could hear her own heartbeat. She could hear Lyra's ragged breathing. She could hear the soft whisper of the wind across the track. But she could not hear anything from Raken. The Alpha stood before her like a statue carved from stone, his golden eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, his claws retracted. The crowd gasped. The Karathi delegation stared in disbelief. Even Taiho, still held by the Dramoni guards, stopped struggling and watched with his mouth hanging open. Raken reached out his massive hands, not to strike, but to take his daughter from Yuna's arms. His movements were gentle, careful, so different from the violent predator he had seemed moments before. Lyra whimpered softly as she was transferred to her father's embrace, but then she relaxed, sinking into the warmth of his fur. "You have courage, human," Raken said quietly. His voice was different now, still deep, still powerful, but without the edge of violence. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. "I just did what was right," Yuna said. Her arms, suddenly empty, fell to her sides. She realized that she was shaking. Anyone would have done the same. Raken looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked around at the arena, at the thousands of spectators who had watched his daughter collapse, who had watched her lie alone on the track, who had done nothing while she suffered. "No," he said finally. "They would not have." He turned away from her and began walking toward the edge of the track, Lyra cradled against his chest. The Karathi delegation moved to meet him, their faces showing confusion and uncertainty. They had never seen their alpha show mercy. They did not know what to do. Yuna stood alone in the middle of the track, her legs shaking, her heart still pounding. She had just challenged the most dangerous creature in the galaxy and survived. She had just broken 1,000 years of Karathi law and walked away alive. She had no idea that this was only the beginning. The Karathi medical bay was a place of cold metal and harsh lights. Machines hummed quietly in the corners, monitoring vital signs and dispensing medicines that humans could not pronounce. The beds were built for creatures 3 times Yuna's size, with thick padding designed to support heavy bodies and dense bones. Lyra lay on one of those beds, her small form almost lost among the blankets and pillows. Medical tubes connected her to machines that pumped fluids into her body and monitored her heart. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing had finally slowed to something close to normal. She would recover. The doctors had said so after examining her. She was young and strong, and with proper rest, she would be back on her feet within a few days. But it had been close. If she had stayed on that track much longer, the outcome might have been very different. Una sat in a chair beside the bed, watching the cub sleep. She had not been invited to stay. No human had ever been allowed in the Karathi medical bay before, but no one had told her to leave either. The Karathi doctors moved around her as if she were invisible, occasionally glancing at her with expressions she could not read. Taiho had tried to visit, but the guards at the door had turned him away. Only Una was allowed inside, and she suspected she knew why. The Alpha wanted to speak with her. She did not have to wait long. The door opened with a soft hiss, and Raken entered the room. He was no longer wearing the ceremonial armor he had worn at the trials. Instead, he wore simple clothes, a loose tunic and pants that made him look almost ordinary. Almost. His golden eyes found Una immediately. He walked toward her with slow, measured steps, and she forced herself to stay seated rather than jumping to her feet. She had already shown enough fear today. She would not show more. "You stayed," Raken said. It was not a question. "She's my patient now," Una replied. "I don't leave my patients." Raken looked at his daughter's sleeping form. Something softened in his face, just for a moment, before the mask of the Alpha returned. He pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat down across from Una. The chair creaked under his weight but held. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft beeping of the medical machines and Lyra's gentle breathing. "Do you know what you did today?" Raken asked finally. "I saved a child's life." "You did more than that." Raken leaned forward, his golden eyes studying her face. "You challenged me in front of my entire pack. You called our sacred laws wrong. You refused to obey a direct order from an Alpha. In the history of the Karathi, no one has ever done these things and lived." Una's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice calm. "So why am I still alive?" Raken was silent for a moment. Then he let out a long breath. Not quite a sigh, but something close to it. "Because you were right." Una blinked. Of all the things she had expected him to say, this was not one of them. "My people have believed for 1,000 years that strength is everything," Raken continued. "We build our cubs to be warriors from the day they are born. We teach them that mercy is weakness, that compassion is for lesser species, that the only path to honor is through suffering and struggle." He paused. "I taught my daughter these things. I pushed her into those trials because I believed that hardship would make her stronger. I watched her fall, and I did nothing, because that is what our laws demanded." He looked at Una with something that might have been shame. "And then you came. A human, soft, weak, fragile by every measure we use. You walked onto that track under gravity that should have crushed you. You lifted my daughter in your arms and carried her to safety. And when I threatened to kill you, you stood your ground and told me I was wrong." "I was scared," Una admitted. "I thought you were going to kill me." "I was going to kill you," Raken said simply. "For a moment, every instinct in my body demanded it. You had challenged me. You had broken all laws. You had shamed me in front of my pack and the entire galaxy. The Alpha in me wanted to tear you apart. What stopped you?" Raken looked at his daughter again. Lyra had shifted in her sleep, one small hand reaching out as if searching for something. He gently took that hand in his massive palm and held it. "She did," he said quietly. "When she looked up at me with those eyes, tired, afraid, in pain, I saw something I had never let myself see before. I saw my child, not a future warrior. not a symbol of our pack's honor. Just a small, frightened child who needed her father. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, and I realized that I had been willing to let her die for my pride. What kind of father does that? What kind of alpha lets his own daughter suffer to preserve a law that brings only pain? Yuna did not answer. She knew he was not really asking her. You asked me if my pride was worth more than her life, Raken continued. The answer should have been obvious. It should have been the easiest question in the world. But I had to have a human, a stranger, an outsider, someone from a species we considered beneath us. I had to have you show me the answer. He released Lyra's hand and looked at Yuna again. My people have been measuring strength incorrectly for 1,000 years. We thought strength meant never showing weakness, never accepting help, never caring about anyone but ourselves. But you showed me a different kind of strength today. The strength to stand against power when you know you cannot win. The strength to protect the helpless, even when it costs you everything. The strength to be kind in a universe that rewards cruelty. He stood up slowly, his massive form rising until he towered over her once again. But this time, there was no threat in his posture. No violence in his eyes. The Greymaw Pack owes you a debt, Raken said. More than a debt. We owe you a lesson. And I intend to make sure that lesson is not forgotten. He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. Stay with her tonight. She should not wake up alone. Then he was gone, and Yuna was left sitting beside the sleeping cub, wondering if she had just witnessed the beginning of something that would change the galaxy forever. Outside the medical bay, Alpha Raken gathered his delegation. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with new purpose. He had spent his entire life believing that the Karathi way was the only way. Now he knew better. And he was going to make sure his people knew better too. The change would not be easy. It would not be quick. But it would happen. Because an exhausted cub had collapsed on a track, and a human had lifted her up, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days passed on Velros Prime. The galactic endurance trials ended, but no one remembered who had won. The only thing anyone talked about was the human woman who had carried a Karathi cub off the track and lived to tell the story. News of the incident spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. By the second day, there was not a single inhabited world that had not heard what happened. Some called Yuna a hero. Others called her a fool. Many simply did not believe the story at all. How could a weak, soft human stand before a Karathi alpha and survive? It had to be exaggerated. It had to be fake. Things like that did not happen in the real galaxy, but it had happened. And in the Karathi medical bay, the proof of it was waking up. Lyra opened her golden eyes slowly, blinking against the harsh lights of the ceiling. Her body felt strange, weak and heavy at the same time, but she was alive. She remembered running, falling, lying on the cold stones unable to move. She remembered warm arms lifting her, a soft voice telling her everything would be okay. She remembered her father's face looking down at her with an expression she had never seen before. She turned her head and saw the human woman sitting beside her bed. Yuna looked tired. Dark circles hung under her eyes, and her hair was messy and unwashed. She had barely left the medical bay in 3 days, catching short naps in her chair and eating whatever food Taiho brought her. But when she saw Lyra's eyes open, she smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made her whole face light up. "Hello there," Yuna said gently. "How are you feeling?" Lyra tried to speak, but her throat was dry and scratchy. Yuna quickly poured a glass of water and held it to the cub's lips, helping her drink. The cool liquid felt wonderful going down. "Better," Lyra managed to say. Her voice was weak but clear. You carried me." "I did." "Why?" It was such a simple question, but it carried the weight of 1,000 years of Karathi culture behind it. Why would anyone help a stranger? Why would anyone risk their life for someone they did not know? It went against everything Lyra had ever been taught. Una was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. Finally, she said, "Because you needed help. That's all. You were hurt, and you needed someone to help you, so I did. But I am Karathi. You are human. We are not the same pack. We are not even the same species. You owed me nothing." "That's true," Una agreed. "But kindness doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need to be earned or owed. Sometimes you help people simply because it's the right thing to do. Because they're suffering, and you can make it stop." Lyra stared at her with wide golden eyes. These words were so different from everything she had learned. Her whole life, she had been told that the universe was cruel and cold, that only the strong survived, that caring about others made you weak. But this human had carried her to safety under crushing gravity, had stood before her father without flinching, had stayed by her bed for 3 days without rest. If caring about others made you weak, then why was this human still standing when so many strong warriors had done nothing? The door to the medical bay opened and Alpha Raken entered. He looked different than he had during the trials. The cold hardness was gone from his face. He looked softer, somehow. More like a father and less like a warlord. "You are awake," he said to Lyra. His voice was gentle, uncertain. The voice of someone learning how to be kind after a lifetime of being hard. "Father," Lyra said. She tried to sit up, but her body was still too weak. Raken moved quickly to her side, his massive hands helping her lean back against the pillows. "Rest," he said. "You need to recover your strength." "I failed the trials," Lyra whispered. Shame colored her voice. "I brought dishonor to our pack." Raken was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something he had never done before. He sat on the edge of her bed and took her small hand in his. "No," he said firmly. "You did not fail. The trials failed you. I failed you." He looked down at her with eyes full of regret. "I pushed you into something you were not ready for. I watched you suffer and did nothing. I almost let you die because I was too proud to admit that our way of doing things was wrong." Tears welled up in Lyra's golden eyes. "But the laws will change," Raken said. "I am the Alpha. I have the power to change them, and I will. From this day forward, the path of proving will be different. Cubs will be allowed to withdraw without shame. Medical help will be available during the race, not just after. And helping someone in need will no longer be a crime. It will be honored." Lyra stared at her father in disbelief. These changes went against everything the Karathi had believed for 1,000 years. The other packs will never accept this. They will learn to accept it. Raken looked at Una, who was watching quietly from her chair. "This human taught me something important. She showed me that true strength is not about never falling. It is about lifting others when they fall. It is not about standing alone. It is about standing up for those who cannot stand for themselves." He turned back to his daughter. "You are my child, Lyra. You are precious to me. I should have told you that every day of your life, but I was too focused on making you strong to remember to make you feel loved. That was my failure, not yours. And I will spend the rest of my days trying to make it right." For the first time in her young life, Lyra felt her father's arms wrap around her in a true embrace. Not the stiff formal contact that Karathi usually shared, but a real hug, warm and tight and full of emotion. She buried her face in his silver fur and cried, releasing years of pain and loneliness and fear. Una quietly stood up and moved toward the door, wanting to give them privacy. But Raken's voice stopped her. "Una of Earth." She turned back to face him. "My people will be watching your species with new eyes from this day forward," Raken said. We thought humans were weak because you have no claws, no fangs, no armor. But we were measuring the wrong things. Your strength lies in something we had forgotten we possessed. The courage to care, the power of compassion, the will to stand against giants for the sake of the small. He lowered his head, the Karathi gesture of deepest respect, given only to those who had earned the highest honor. You have changed the Karathi, Yuna. You have changed me. And I believe, in time, you will change the galaxy. Yuna felt her eyes grow wet. She blinked quickly, trying to stop the tears. I just did what anyone should have done, she said. But no one else did, Raken replied. That is what makes you special. That is what makes humanity special. You see suffering, and you cannot look away. You see someone falling, and you reach out your hand. It seems like such a small thing, but it is the foundation of everything good in the universe. Outside the medical bay, Taiho was waiting for her. His face split into a huge grin when he saw her. So, he said, you just changed 1,000 years of alien culture with stubbornness and a refusal to mind your own business. How does it feel? Yuna laughed, a tired, genuine laugh. It feels like I need a very long sleep, and maybe a vacation, somewhere with normal gravity. They walked together through the corridors of Velros Prime, past aliens of a dozen different species who stopped to stare at the human woman they had all heard about. Some nodded with respect. Others simply watched with curious eyes. The galaxy was changing, and everyone could feel it. Behind them, in the medical bay, a young Karathi cub was learning for the first time what it felt like to be truly loved. And in the viewing halls, where the great packs gathered, an alpha was beginning to teach his people a new way of measuring strength that an exhausted cub had collapsed on the track. A human had lifted her, and the galaxy would never forget. In the years that followed, the Karathi and humans would become close allies. Other species would follow their example, learning to balance strength with compassion, power with kindness. And whenever anyone asked how this great change had begun, the answer was always the same. It began with a small act of courage. It began with someone choosing to care. It began with a human who refused to look away.